Rabbi Yossi continues in this brisa, and he tells us the following: Gamru, once they complete that Suda that they began on Chol on Erev Shabbos, then two kosos are brought out. Kos Rishon Mevarachal Birkas HaMazon, because Sheni Omer Olav Kiddush Sayom. And that reflects what we saw in the Girsa of the Rashbam in his second Mishnah, Tosfos' Girsa, that first comes Birkas HaMazon, because the Suda that you began earlier generated a Chiyuv Birkas HaMazon, and then we're ready for Kiddush. But we need two different kosos, and the Gemara is going to ask why we need two different kosos. Now, let's add another principle here into the equation, another variable, and that is Tadir. Birkas HaMazon is considered Tadir because during the course of the week, we eat meals constantly and we recite Birkas HaMazon. The Chiyuv of Kiddush, relative to Birkas HaMazon, is called Eino Tadir, because Kiddush is only once a week. And therefore, we have a principle Tadir, She'eino Tadir, Tadir Kodem. We will recite Birkas HaMazon first, and then Birkas Kiddush Sayom. Otherwise, we could say that since he began to eat his meal before Kiddush Hayom, before it got dark, he already became Chayav in Birkas HaMazon before the Chiyuv Kiddush emerges. And when you have two Chiyuvim that are Chal simultaneously, you first give due to the original Chiyuv that predated the second Chiyuv. So the Gemara asks the following: Amai, why are we dividing up these two brachos into two kosos? Why can't we recite both brachos, Birkas HaMazon and Kiddush, on one kos? Now, I would just like to make a comment here, if you'll allow me to, and that is that conceptually, there really is a fundamental difference between these two kosos and these two brachos. After all, the bracha on Mazon has nothing to do with Kiddush. There doesn't seem to be any linkage conceptually to these two brachos. It happens to be that both chiyuvim overlap at the same time because he started his meal before Kiddush Hayom, and now he has a chiyuv Kiddush. But in terms of the two brachos, there's no common theme that connects these two brachos, and therefore there could be a logical machayev to say that we need two different kosos, that two different mitzvahs, two different brachos, two different kosos. But the Gemara says the following: Omer Rav Huna, Omer Rav Sheshes, Ein Omrim Shtei Kedushos al Kos Echad. Now I'm going to try to take my pshat and be very stubborn about it and place it and push it into the Lashon HaGemara of Rav Huna. Rav Huna means to say that Shtei Kedushos, these are two distinct mitzvos. The word Kedushos here means mitzvos, such as Kedushos b'mitzvosa. And these mitzvos have no common ground. Birkas HaMazon, it's the whole year round, and Kiddush is only when there's Kiddush Sayom. And therefore, we're not going to take one cost for two different mitzvahs. My timer, Omer Rav Nachbar Yitzchak l'fi she'enos mitzvahs chavilos. This is a very famous principle that appears all over Shas, and we'll try to explain it. But I just want to say in advance that this principle of ein osim mitzvahs chavilos applies in this case of shtei kedushos, meaning shtei mitzvahs. If Lu Yitzuyer, you would find a common theme that links together these two mitzvahs, such that it's not just coincidental in terms of time, that they overlap in time, but that they really belong together, and they have a common link, a common denominator, then we would not apply the principle of ein osim mitzvahs chavilos. Now, what does this mean, ein osim mitzvahs chavilos? So Rashi indicates, and the Rashbam embellishes it, that we're talking about Nira olav kemasa, Nira sherotzah lipotamim bebehera ka'adam shebemayr lifrok maso. And this Rashi appears in Masechet Soto when they talk about whether you could be mashket two sotos simultaneously with the same same mayim arorim. And Rashi says over there, when you're carrying a burden, you're looking for the first opportunity to unload the burden that's heavy on your back, and you're looking to clap around, to kill two birds with one stone and try to get these mitzvahs done over as soon as possible, with one course. It looks like the whole idea of mitzvahs is just a burden that you want to free yourself and liberate yourself of that burden. So the Gemara asks, "V'lo, is it really so that we will not recite two brachos on one course?" V'asanya hanichnas lebeso b'motzoi Shabbos. So he davened Ma'ariv. Now he comes home. He's ready to be mavdil ala kos. Mivarach ala yayin, ala ma'or, ala b'samim, v'achakach omer havdola ala kos. So notice the four brachos that we're going to cite on the kos of yayin. First, bori priya gofen, then bori moria eish, then bori minei b'samim, and finally, Bachat Hashem Avdu Mikodesh L'Chol Ben Olachoshech, etc., etc. And then he drinks the kos. Now that's the ratio of this brisa. So let's take a look at the seif of the brisa. V'im ein lo ela kos echad. He has only one kos of yayin. Then meinicho li'achar mozon v'shalshalon li'achar kulon li'achar. What happens now? He's eating Suda Shlishis. And when he wants to bench on Suda Shlishis, he wants a kos. I mean, that's a whole sugya in itself, whether a kos for Birkas HaMazon is an absolute chiyuv, when and what. But he needs a kos for Birkas HaMazon. But he realizes that's the end of the yayin. He only has one kos worth of yayin, and he needs that yayin for Avdolah. So what does he do? What he could do is he could finish his meal and recite Birkas HaMazon on that kos, and then use the same kos to organize all the four brachos of Havdalah. So Achar Birkas HaMazon al kos, Omer Olav, on that very same kos, Kol Birkas Havdalah, V'shoses HaKos. So it turns out that the kos of Birkas HaMazon is the same kos as the kos of Havdalah. And once again, the Gemara is not bothered by four brachos of Havdalah on a kos, because as we said before, those are all connected to one mitzvah of Havdalah. That's not Chavilas Chavilas. Chavilas is when you take two distinct mitzvahs that have no common denominator, like, for example, Birkas HaMazon and Havdalah. What's common between Birkas HaMazon and Havdalah? Therefore, you would need two kosos. And yet, the Brisa says that you only have one kos. You're going to use that kos for multi-purposes, both for Birkas HaMazon and for Havdalah. What happened? Teinosin mitzvos chavilos, taking two brachos of two mitzvahs which have no common denominator, and being mekayim them with one chefza, with one object, one kos. So Gemara answers, "Ein lo shiny." You're right. Einosin mitzvos chavilos. And for sure, he needs a kos for Birkas HaMazon and a separate kos for Havdalah. But he only has one kos. So what are we going to do? So now, for the sake and the benefit of having all these mitzvahs ala kos, we're going to be mavater and overlook the requirement of einosim mitzvahs chavilas. We will do a chavilas situation on one kos. And he will recite both Birkas HaMazon and Birkas Havdalah on the same kos. Now, in the case of Birkas HaMazon and Birkas HaKiddush, where let's assume he has two kosos, so that he started his meal on Friday. Now he wants a kos for Birkas HaMazon. He now after Chashecha has a chiyuv kiddush ala kos, he's going to take 2 kosos because ain't no mitzvahs chavilas. Lu Yitzuyer, he only has 1 kos. Then we would allow him to recite Birkas Hamazon and Kiddush on the same kos. Just like we use the same kos of Shalosh Shudas for Birkas Hamazon and Avdol if there's only 1 kos. Same thing will apply to Kiddush and Birkas Hamazon. So the Gemara asks, Veha Yontiv Shechalios Achar Shabbos. The Gemara is still attacking this principle of Rav Sheshes Ein Osim Mitzvos Chavilos with the case of Yontif Liachar Shabbos, which is, I think, this year. That's what we're in less than a month. We'll have this this scenario. If I'm not mistaken, I think Pesach is on Motzi Shabbos. So now what happens? He needs to recite Havdalah for Shabbos. For that, he needs a kos. He needs to recite Kiddush for Yontif, and for that, he needs a kos. And in such a case, if he comes in on Motzi Shabbos and he needs Havdalah plus Kiddush, so the Gemara says, then in such a case, what's going to happen? Are we going to require 2 kotzos, one for Havdalah and another for Kiddush, Havdalah for Shabbos and Kiddush for Yontif? And now we're talking about the Islay. He's got an abundance of kotzos. Why? Because it's the night of Pesach. He's got wine coming out, right? He's got daled kotzos of yayin. And Omar Rav says that if he makes Kiddush and Avdol ala kos, then here's the Seder. We're going to get into the Machlokas Rav and Shmuel about the Seder HaBrachos, what's called Yaknahaz, in just a minute. Rav's opinion is Yaknahaz, which means Yayin Kiddush Ner Avdolah. And the Avdolah begins and ends, bookends, and what's sandwiched in between is going to be Kiddush. And we'll see exactly why Rav holds what he was. And it seems from Rav that even though he has plenty of kotzos, because again, on Leil Pesach, there's plenty of wine available, nevertheless, he recites Kiddush and Avdol in the same kos. Rav is just telling you in what order on that kos he should recite Yayin first, then Kiddush, then Ner, and then Avdol. So the Gemara answers, Amri, midolo Omar Zman, Michlal b'Shvi shel Pesach Haskinon. Normally, it's Yakna Haz, not Yakneh, but with a Zayin at the end, which means Zman, Shechion. So on Leil Pesach, first night of the Chag, we recite Yakna Haz, completing with Shechion. Why was the Zayin omitted here? Obviously, Rav is talking about a case where there is no Shechion. So when could you have a Motzi Shabbos going into Yontif without a Shechion? It's got to be Shvi Shel Pesach. Now, the last day of Pesach is not a new holiday and therefore doesn't generate and deserve Shechionu. So there's no Zman. Now, by the time he gets to the Shvi Shel Chag, and now Shvi Shel Chag was on a Saturday night, Sunday, he has no yayin left, a dearth of wine, because during the night of the Seder plus the balance of the Chag, he's drunk all his wine. And in such a case, Rav says, Yakne Ha, meaning this is the order of both Havdalah and Kiddush on the same kos, because he only has one kos. Umida Lomer's mind, since his mind was not mentioned, Michlal, the B'Shvi Shel Pesach Askinon. And that's the only yontif that we have where there's no Shechionu. And perhaps he's a poor person, he doesn't have enough wine. Whatever wine he had, Achale, he drank it during the course of Pesach. But let's say he doesn't have enough wine, so he doesn't have 2 cups. And therefore, yakna ha on one kos. Gemara continues to object. Va yontif rishon de isle. What would be in a case like this year where Motzei Shabbos is yontif rishon and he has enough wine for 2 kosos? Amar Abaye, yet Abaye said that in such a case, yakne, okay, yak zenov, Rav Amar yakna has. We're familiar with Rava because we pass like Rav yakna has. And Abaye's sheet is that you start with yayin and kiddush, and then instead of going straight to Havdalah, you recite Zman, because Abaye wants to attach the Shechiyanu to the kiddush, which is the first part, whereas Rava wants the yayin and kiddush to be followed by ner and Havdalah, and then leaves Zman for the end. And the Gemara is going to spend an entire sugya on Daf Kuf Gimel, that's tomorrow's Daf, to try to explain the Machlokes Abaye v'Rava. But once the Amoraim Abaye v'Rava mentions Zman, the question only is where you put the Zman. Is it right after Kiddush like Abaye or after Havdalah like Rava? Then obviously we're dealing with the first night of Pesach. And he's got plenty of wine. The ample, even an ani has plenty of wine. The Mishnah says later on that we have to guarantee that everyone, actually the Mishnah beforehand, I meant to say, guarantee that everyone, even an ani, has 4 cups of wine. So there's plenty of wine available. And yet, we're going to recite everything on one kos. The Machlokes Abaye v'Rava is just in what sequence and where we put this man. But on one kos, he's reciting both Havdalah for Shabbos and Kiddush for Yontif. And those are 2 Kiddushos. How could they be on one kos when he has available ample source and supply of kosos? Ella says the Gemara, Havdalah v'Kiddush chada milsehi. Now, I would like to suggest the following. When do we apply the principle of Einos and mitzvahs chavilos? That's when these 2 mitzvahs are conceptually separated, fundamentally different one from the other, and you're trying to pile them up on one cheft or on one gav, in one package, one chavila. But let's say you have 2 mitzvahs that have a certain common bond. They are both generated by Kedushas Hayom. It has nothing to do with Seudah. When you talk about Birkas HaMazon plus Havdalah, Birkas HaMazon plus Kiddush, what's the Shaykhs? What's the connection between Birkas HaMazon and Kiddush or Havdalah? But when you're talking about Havdalah and Kiddush, that's already a horse of a different color, because those are both generated by Kedushas Hayom. And I'm going to prove this to you. The Gemara says, Havdalah v'Kiddush chadav milsehi. They are both recited as a result of Kedushas Hayom. One is Havdalah for the Kedushas Hayom of Shabbos that is now departed, and the other is Kiddush for the Kedushas Hayom of Yontif that is now emerged. And get this, the Rashbam adds that in the Havdalah of Motzei Shabbos entering into Yontif, he recites Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, from the Kedusha Shabbos to the Kedusha Yontif. So, in the nusach of the Havdalah indicates a connection with Kiddush. What is Kiddush? We are expressing and declaring the Kedushas Hayom. Well, we've already indicated the Kedushas Hayom in Birkas Havdalah, because instead of saying Baruch Hamad ben Kodesh l'Chol, we said Baruch Hamad ben Kodesh l'Kodesh. But again, Rabotai, although that's true, that's only a siman l'davar. That's only an indicator. It's an indicator that both Havdalah and Kiddush has some common ground. They are both generated by Kedushas Hayom, whether it's b'knisasa or b'yitziasa. Birkas HaMazon v'Kiddush, or I would add here Birkas HaMazon v'Havdalah, trade milidinu. There are 2 separate brachas, fundamentally different. They have nothing in common. There's no denominator, and therefore it would be a violation of chavilos if you were to put them all on one kos, unless you have no choice. You only have one. Beautiful sugi. Ufa, let's go back to the brisa itself. Yontif shechalios achar Shabbos, right? We have the case of Yontif on Motzi Shabbos, and now he needs Kiddush Hayom for the Knisa of Yontif. He needs Havdalah for the Yitzia from Shabbos. And we have Machlokis about the Seder HaBrochos between Rav and Shmuel. Rav Arma Yak Ne, Yayin, Kiddush, Ner, and Havdalah. So first, he recites Bar Pri Hagafen. That's clear. In any Seder HaBrochos, you always begin, the kickoff is always going to be Bar Pri Hagafen. And Bar Pri Hagafen always comes before Kiddush, Havdalah, any Seder HaBrochos. We'll have it in Berchas Nesuin, under the Chuppah. Bar Pri Hagafen is first, because we have to be Masada the Brachas Alakos. And this is the sheet of Beis Hillel in Masechet Brachas on Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis, that the Seder HaKiddush in Shabbos and Yom Tov always begins with Borei Pri Hagafen. Beit Shammai disagree. They start with Kiddush Hayom, and only afterwards they put the bracha on the Yayin Samach L'Shtiyah at the end. And our sugya here reflects the sheet of Beis Hillel, that we always begin with the bracha on Yain, and only afterwards we get to Kiddush Hayom. Fine. So now, according to Rav, he starts with Borei Pri Hagafen, and now he's ready for Kiddush. And after he's Makadesh the Yontiv, because it's now the entry of Yontiv, then he goes on to Ner and Havdalah, because Birchas HaKiddush comes before Birchas Havdalah. The reason for that is because if he would start Havdalah first, it looks like he's running away from Shabbos. He wants to end Shabbos as early as he can. So we want to demonstrate that, no, we're holding on to the Shabbos. We want to delay Havdalah. So let's begin with Kiddush, and then we'll go on to Havdalah. That's the Shita of Rav. Shmuel Amar, Yan Hak, which means that we are going to start with Havdalah, and then we get the Kiddush. So again, everybody agrees we always start any Seder HaBrachos with Yayin, Borei Pri Hagafen. But whereas Rav at this point, after Borei Pri Hagafen, goes straight to Kiddush, Shmuel goes straight to Havdalah. And that is Ner Havdalah. And then at the end, we're ready for Kiddush. And according to Shmuel, Birchas Havdalah kodemes leBirchas HaKiddush. And therefore, the Seder HaBrachos in this case should begin with Havdalah, and then, like any Motzi Shabbos, and then go on to Kiddush. And the Gemara on Daf Kuf Gimel, which Rabbi Hashem will see tomorrow, offers another 3 shitos as to what the Seder HaBrachos has to be. So tomorrow, B'li Neder, we'll be studying the Seder HaBrachos, which is relevant to this year, actually, in which Shabbos ends and Yom Tov begins. Okay, then? So wish you a great day.